because everything has to be tested. You don't just believe it. And with
Everything
faith,
has to be
there's
tested?
no way, with faith, there's no way. Faith is a matter of preservation of belief. So there's nothing you would accept to ever prove you wrong. In fact, that's why apologetics exists.
How do
That's
you
why.
test the scientific method?
You test claims and hypotheses. There would be no point to testing the scientific method because the scientific method is not a claim or a hypothesis. However, you can make claims about the scientific method. You can claim that the scientific method is effective at producing models that reliably predict experience. And that is, in fact, a testable claim.
Now, this faith stuff is really interesting. I'm going to prove to you you have faith.
Okay, I don't, and I object to faith as being the most.
I'm going to prove it.
But
I'm going to prove it.
Okay, you're going to play a word game by which you think you can, but no. Okay, go ahead.
Prove to me you're the same person you were a week ago. And prove to yourself that you're the same person, the exact same person, and not just created 5 minutes ago with all these memories and stuff. Prove to me the continuity, or prove to yourself the continuity of your own existence from a week ago to now.
Slick seems to think that there are only two kinds of beliefs. Beliefs that have been proven and beliefs that are based on faith. A belief that is inferred from evidence may not be proven, but it isn't faith either. At least not the biblical variety of faith. You don't have to prove a belief in order for a belief to be a reasonable non-faith belief.
What kind of documentation do I need to show?
Documentation?
Yeah,
I didn't ask you. I asked you. You have to prove it to me, and prove it to yourself. So you look at your ID, your birth certificate, does that prove that you're the same person you were back then?
So, well, of course it does, unless there's some other possibility.
I'm pretty sure that these two are not using the same definition of proof. I know Aaron uses a different standard of proof than the one philosophers and mathematicians usually use.
I don't take it on faith. I have evidence, and the evidence that I have in this case, as I
didn't ask for evidence. I asked for proof.
And that what is proof? Proof is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence.
Philosophers usually define proof as a logically incontrovertible argument rather than merely an overwhelming preponderance of evidence. But Matt Slick seems to define faith in such a way that any belief which isn't incontrovertible is faith or blind faith.
Your position is so weak that, as I predicted and as I said on stage, you have to first attack reality itself. How do you know that the laws of physics won't change 5 seconds from now? How do you know that you were the same person?
God is a necessary precondition for the intelligibility and consistency of the universe. You don't know. Have you ever read the problem of induction? You ever studied the problem of induction?
This is what I brought up in the last video. Apologists will often bring up the problem of induction as though it means that beliefs inductively inferred from empirical evidence are on no surer footing than beliefs held without evidence or in spite of evidence. They try to undermine the epistemology of science to make it look like their own epistemology is just as good.
What did you just say about God?
God is the necessary preconditions for all of this intelligibility. I can say the reason the universe is...
Okay, the reason you just make an assertion about God which has no evidence behind it. All about God have no evidence behind it.
How do you know?
How do I know? I've been doing this for 20 years.
Okay, what kind of evidence would you look for God? What kind of evidence might you think?
Well, a certain consistency that we don't have. I would expect virtually everything in reality to be very different if there was a God. For one thing, we wouldn't require faith to believe in a God. God wouldn't require faith to begin with. There would be some consistency behind the religion. You wouldn't be judged on whether or not you believe, because if you're going to be judging people on whether they believe, then you're
all over the place.
A poor salesman trying to sell nothing for something at a high price.
Okay. What kind of evidence would you expect from a transcendent being?
What the fuck is a transcendent being?
Right, and
now, transcendence means that God is non-dependent upon the universe in space and time, and he's not restricted by space and time. That's what it means. He transcends the universe.
Apologists often assert that God transcends space and time, or is timeless and spaceless, but I have no idea what the fuck that even means. So far as I can tell, this isn't even a coherent assertion. I don't understand the difference between saying you can't expect empirical evidence of God because God is timeless and spaceless, and saying you can't expect empirical evidence of God because God doesn't exist for any time or in any place.
Hey guys, I want to get each of you to define faith.
Well, I did. Faith. Okay. My favorite definition of that would be that it is an unreasonable conviction that is assumed without reason and defended against all reason. But the one that you're going to find in most sources, the consensus is that it is a stoic conviction that is assumed without evidence and is independent of evidence and defended against all evidence, which is what apologetics exists for. It exists to defend faith against evidence.
Okay. And
Here's
wait,
my definition.
Matt, give us your definition.
Faith is a profound trust based on evidence and reason. Jesus appeared in John 20:25-28 to Stephen. He said, look, here's my hands. Put your finger into my hands. It's after the resurrection. Here's my side. Put your hand in my side. Now believe.
If faith is based on evidence and reason, then what would you call the kind of belief described in John 20:29, which says, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed." Usually when the religious talk about faith being a virtue, this seems to be what they are referring to. Believing without seeing evidence, not belief based on evidence. It is believing without seeing that makes you blessed, according to Jesus.
You know, when people tell me that faith is just something we have as Christians, and there's no reason or evidence for it, they're convincing me. They're telling me they don't know what they're talking about, and you don't.
Okay, so you have a hearsay document. You have a story, and
you keep ignoring the points I'm making, and you jump to something else. It's a sign of intellectual weakness on your part to do this repeatedly. I show you something that you have a mistake in, and then what you do is you ignore it and go to something else.
You didn't show me
I
any.
did. I showed you the biblical definition of faith that is exemplified by Christ himself. You ignored it and went to something else.
No, you showed me the definition that I told you earlier exists only in the dictionary and does not exist in the sermons, in the scriptures of any religion.
I just showed you and gave you the references in John 20:25-28. I told you what happened. Jesus says, here's the evidence, now believe.
Yes, that's what it says in John 20:25-28, but Slick, for reasons that I think are obvious, leaves out the very next passage which I quoted earlier. In that passage, Jesus is clearly saying that belief without evidence makes you blessed as opposed to belief based on evidence. Belief based on evidence apparently does not make you blessed.